G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate. The Ukraine war has ebbs and flows, but in the last month the intensity has increased. I'm sure a lot of you have heard various news reports about the largest drone strike since the beginning of the war. These have happened every week. There's been but these attacks started around an average of 300 drones, then 500. Since the amount of anti-drone technology and interceptors has flown into Ukraine, Russia has increased the amount of drones it fires because it's an economic war, not just a political war. Or a physical conflict, if you prefer. The war of words, the propaganda from Zelensky, is full of holes, but most of the Western media won't point them out, such as when Zelensky claims foreign technology as Ukrainian developed. Well, they may have been developed in Ukraine, or not, and in most of the times not. But we'll get to that. First, I'd like to thank the patrons and other supporters who help make this channel possible. Hint, hint. All my links are in the link tree. Hint, hint. Alright, so we have the New York Times, who I'm not going to give the time of day to, but wow. Was it coke cages? I think they appeared in 23 when Ukraine started using drones to attack Russian tanks. And it wasn't soon after that Russia used drones. So don't blame Russia for these drone attacks when it was Ukraine who gave them the idea. Ukraine's new interceptor drone? American. Of course, Trump has organised European leaders to come. They've changed the story, although I'm not sure. But we should have heard something today, maybe tomorrow. But European leaders were meant to arrive today, according to some reports. But they didn't because Macron has shit the bed and basically a vote of no confidence. You're never going to have a stable political situation in France, while a third of the population have their head shoved up firmly up their ass and voting for the radical left. Now, I understand why Marine Le Pen and others would get rid of Mr. Austerity, who was cutting everything but migrant programs or funding to the Ukraine war, and that's really why he was sent. Right? This is really why France is in trouble. They've been lying about how much they sent to Ukraine. And they've been relying on the United States to underwrite them for the last 4 years. Since US aid has been cut, notice how shaky all of a sudden UK and many other European countries are. And this is what the left do. They rattle the cage saying, you're undermining our alliances. No, you're not. Because don't forget, all these liberals, they're brainwashed into thinking that they have to humiliate themselves in order to please God. Well, actually, they're not pleasing God, they're pleasing Satan. But because in reality, the organisers of these rallies and protest groups are themselves former beneficiaries of US aid, often run by judges and judges' wives. And who are these judges? And what do? They shake each other's hand. Okay, the little handshake society where they go, I'll restore your USAID, you restore my USAID, and I'll help you restore his USAID. And it goes around in circles, right? All trying to force the US government to spend money on ridiculous programs that in the last 70 years has achieved net negatives. Not just for Europe, but for Africa and China, China's the only one, well, one of the few who've actually benefited from aid. So was India. But of course, if you run around saying, "Oh, we've got to support aid to Africa, otherwise they won't be our friends," bro, they're not our friends, okay? They're that high school dropout who lives with his hand in your pocket. And handing them to China, hey, let China have the 36 trillion in debt. Oh, but Chinese influence. Should be more worried about the Chinese influence in New York City. Isn't it funny how Democrats bleat about Chinese influence and ignore Mandami in New York or the others in Baltimore and Chicago and Detroit? Now we're finding out that some musicians and actors are only multi-millionaires because they get money from endorsing DNC, like Ms. Nixon. No relation as far as I know. But Cynthia Nixon and many others have been recipients of foreign money as well. Susan Sarandon got money from the UAE, which she never declared, by the way, and has never been in trouble for. Now we have Qatar and others who have also been buying Russian oil, and of course they have also been peddling influence in the United States. So all these people bleating about Russian influence, ask them, how much Chinese influence? How much Ukrainian influence? Remember Colonel Vindman? He was registered as a foreign agent. What about Hunter Biden and Turkey and Ukraine? Wouldn't have a war in Ukraine and wouldn't have tech companies setting up illegally in Ukraine to peddle US arms to Ukraine, trying to violate sanctions. Now you may say, oh, but they're ally. No, they could buy arms legally. What's the illegal part is they're setting up companies to transfer technology to Ukraine because the Ukrainian government is paying them directly. This is the theft of US technology. And of course, our greatest ally, Israel, has done that to us for the last 75 years. India has done that to us. China has done that, and they're not even our ally. But liberals, they don't believe it. You know what humility means? To be humble, to not be proud, to not boast one's achievements. Yeah. Notice how every liberal says, I'm the bestseller and all these other things. Yeah. How many of these bestsellers wouldn't be... How many bestsellers are because of US aid? How many wars wouldn't be started over US aid? You do know the Arab-Israeli wars were fighting over US aid, right? The Americans shifted aid to Israel, so countries formerly on US aid attacked Israel to force America to pay them aid. You know that's why Palestine attacks Israel, right? To force payment. This is why every Palestinian who leaves Gaza should never be allowed into the West. They're not allowed into Arab countries. We've got to stop being the dumping ground for warmongers and war profiteers. How many people like Hassan Piker fundraise off wars? And how much goes into his pocket? Well, you've got to ask yourself, how does he afford his $3 million mansion? Somebody's paying him off, right? How many people out there, how many of these pro-Ukrainian channels are paid off by Ukraine and geo-locked so that they're the only ones available in Ukraine. You have literally a captive audience in Ukraine because very little internet is available. And what internet is available is carefully firewalled. How many people who are critics of Zelensky are shadow banned in France, Germany, Poland, and the UK, are so-called liberal democracies who engage in routine censorship? There are so many people who have careers because someone has put the thumbs on a scale, yet the masses out there ignorantly and blindly follow these sheep off the proverbial cliff for the past 75 years. We've been warning you about Orwellian fascism since Orwell, okay? But you are so afraid to learn what fascism really is. Because if you do, you're afraid that you'll see it where it exists. And that is in the halls of Google, Facebook, Apple, Blue Sky, the DNC, the British Labour Party, and all the other left-wing groups out there. And you'll see how fascist Canada is. Because fascism didn't come to power overnight. It was a long road, decades, of successive liberal democracies who engaged in gun confiscation, censorship, anti-Semitism, so that you would have a boogeyman to blame when everything went wrong. But if they were such the boogeyman, then how come they kept getting richer and richer? The Chinese call it fattening the pig. You select a group, you pick on them, but you also allow them to get rich. But once they're extremely rich, then you rob them of everything. Now, it may not make sense, but it's all to distract you from the real villains. Who can't you criticize? Why is Ukraine so important to the West? Because they want their war. They can't win. Europe has never won economically. Europe had won the war economically. They didn't need after World War II, there shouldn't have been other wars. We had the economic power. But what happened? Well, socialism. The socialists have always promised to fatten the pig and then slaughter it. Mondavi promises to slaughter all the fattened pigs on Wall Street. But it was the Democrats who created this system in the first place. All these tax loopholes, Obama, California, the highest tax state in the union. It's also the one with the most tax deductions. Highest property values with the least high rises. I think LA has only half the high rises of New York. And in fact, you look at the property values in LA Hills, but now they're facing stagnation. Every country is going to face stagnation sooner or later. You can't grow your economy to 100% wealthy. That creates collapse. That's what happens. You grow until you can't grow anymore, and then you completely collapse because there's nobody who'll work. Everybody wants everybody else to work. Everybody's got 5 properties. Everybody's got 100 mansions. Everybody's got a 2 car. What happened, right? Everybody had a house, 2 cars in the garage. companies were going broke because they had no more customers. The world was too poor for American goods in the 1950s. So companies collapsed. And those who didn't went overseas to make the goods cheaper because they couldn't export. You can be too successful, and this is why American governments have limited growth. But unfortunately, governments have used war as a way of creating new business, new economic growth. And you see this with BlackRock calling Ukraine an investment opportunity. So don't blame BlackRock, however. They are under economic pressure to please the Ontario Teachers Union, the Saudi Sovereign Fund, the Norwegian Sovereign Fund, and a dozen other sovereign funds and organisations and private funds who are all locked behind secret walls in the Bahamas and other havens which shouldn't exist. But they do. You can't blame BlackRock for doing what they're being told to do and legally empowered to do. If people are too lazy or too arrogant or too ignorant or too greedy to realise that pension funds are to enrich others and that you only get a fraction of that money and will only ever see a fraction of that money, and that the governments will successively keep raising the pension age until you basically, the pension retirement age is older than you are. Now, there are key events, of course, in the fighting, which are repeated every day. Russia is accused of attacking Ukraine, but they leave out the fact that Ukraine attacked first. So we have a Ukrainian drone attack on Russia, followed by Russian drone attack on Ukraine. Ukraine claims to have hit every military target, while Ukraine also claims that Russia only strikes settlements and kills women and children. Occasionally, they'll report an attack on a power plant because they need to blame. No, actually, this is the weird part, because they often blame drone attacks on the blackouts when, let's face it, a lot of these blackouts are just Ukraine running out of gas and oil. Now we have a Ukrainian operative arrested by the FSB. They arrest, I read somewhere it was an average of 3 people a week in Russia for spying for Ukraine. Many don't make the news, but the FSB has arrested saboteurs, but sometimes after the act. That is true. But it's usually, that's how most crimes are, right? They catch people after the act. Because that's when you leave your biggest fingerprints, right? But the Russian Ministry of Defense has also claimed to have shot down 195 drones and 2 bombs in the last period. This brings the total for this week to over 500 Ukrainian drones shot into Russia. I think it's 97 or 98% of them are shot down. Now, the EU, of course, is pushing for new sanctions against Russia, but they want them backed by the United States. The Kremlin, of course, has given EU the middle finger and says, go ahead, we don't care, we're going to sanction you back. And those sanctions can force the Federation to change its position, says Dmitry Peskov, well-known Russian spokesperson for the Kremlin. And remember, you have Brazil and many other South American countries now course, they are worried, can't blame them, about Trump's automatic tariffs on any country trading with Russia. But I think ultimately, if you use tariffs too often, you might fracture the world into a 50-50 where you'll just divide the world. You'll have one half of the world not trading with the other half. And that could lead to disasters as well. Many people believe the isolation of Germany is what led to little mustache man getting into power, because successive liberal governments in Germany also helped, and they were already on the road to fascism because of World War I and the rise of socialism in the East, and that the British didn't want to listen to the German conservatives. The British Americans dismissed it outright. And of course, if you've seen the Democrat Party and their alliances with socialism going back to Roosevelt, you'll understand that a lot of Americans helped the Russian Revolution because they thought it was destroying empires. America has a hand in so many bizarre situations that go against their public stated policies, such as helping the socialists in Vietnam, knowing, although the socialists in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh was pro-American for a while, knowing, however, that they would eventually have a war in Southeast Asia against the colonial powers because France had made a secret deal with Roosevelt, or Truman, depending on who you ask, to basically restore the French government in Southeast Asia after the war. Even though they collaborated with Japan and were basically an empire, which I thought empires were bad, but, that's the problem, isn't it? Anything just for power, I guess. And that's what it truly is that we don't have governments with a position. We have people who shift their policies based on whatever gets them elected. Such as the pro-war Democrats of the 1950s being replaced by the anti-war Democrats of the 1960s to pin the Vietnam War that their fathers started, onto the Republicans because of the family honour. So you had people like Al Gore become extreme socialists. For convenience, of course, because in real life they're also extreme capitalists. Just like all good commies, really. Now, of course, diplomacy continues in Ukraine, but again, a lot of it is convenience. They talk about Russia using cluster munitions, but ignore the fact that Ukraine routinely seeds its fields with mines, seeding its fields with landmines using cluster munitions. Yet this explosion here isn't a cluster munition. Okay, cluster munitions don't explode like that. This is a different type of munition, okay? I think it's called shotgun munition, okay? Missile flies in and then explodes. That explosion creates a kinetic ball, which you see there, molten, which will pierce through bunkers. You can see the shock cone of the explosion, so for every reaction is an equal opposite reaction. You see the cluster around it is actually fragments of the missile as it's exploding. You see there the primary charge and the secondary explosion of the propellant. So the primary charge is blowing the missile apart. At the same time, the secondary goes off, which blasts the cone forward. The cone, of course, leaving behind debris as it melts. And it will basically who knows what it's aimed at? But let's see. Do they have what it's aimed at?
Ukrainian authorities say Russian forces carried out the biggest attack of the war overnight across the country. But many clearly got through.
Yet another attack suffered the most. Shahed
Iran too drones in an attempt to swamp Ukrainian defense and carries a payload relatively slow. The result is damage to government offices. Shoot them all down.
And right now I'm going to tell you the building that was hit was not shown at all. They don't even show that explosion. This is yesterday's video with a new thumbnail. Just so you know. That it doesn't show you the building that was hit. But obviously this, you do know that some of these buildings in Ukraine are facades. But they're actually military bunkers with an exterior that makes them look like government offices. And often, actually, the outer layers do operate like a government office, often including the upper floors. And somewhere around, see a low-level building like this, you see that they have thick concrete roofs. Well, they're hidden sometimes in the core. And that core is actually an elevator down. And by blasting that elevator, you basically trap the people underground. Now, we don't know if that's true or not. I'm just saying they're not showing you where that missile was aimed at and where it hit. But you did see the explosion in the distance. That's about it. That's all they show you. And then they say they don't want to help the enemy. What does Russia have that we don't have? That's right. High-speed aerial photograph to actually be able to... They could circle here and use the curvature of the Earth to photograph all of that within, one frame per 640,000 fractions of a second. So it takes about a bit. Now, it takes high speed and a lot of processing, but they basically create a huge visual map showing Ukraine somewhat taking about an hour, thousands of processes per second, matching photos, thousands of processes, matching photos, putting them together, so that they can see what they hit and know and study their targets. But they are hitting their targets, okay? Zelensky wouldn't be whining if Russia was wasting its time. Or less whining. Zelensky loves to whine. Now it appears Russia has expanded slightly its buffer zone here north of Sumy. There's been drone activity. Russian drones may or may have been shot down or hitting Ukrainian snipers hiding out in civilian housing. Because they never show you the context of why that place was hit. Because they want you to imagine that a civilian house means that civilians were killed. Okay? This is how propaganda works. Most propaganda is about making you assume. Fighting here at Kupiansk has failed to secure the road into Kupiansk, but the field north of Kupiansk is still occupied by the Russians. A little bit of expansion of the buffer zone up here. Very little movement up here, but there's been some movement up here. Very little very little movement down here. But there's been some movement here as well. But this little section still. But it's still movement, right? It's still a lot more movement than in other areas. This advance seems to have stalled, or fattened out a bit, I should say, but still stalled. Front line here is what they would call stabilized, but no actual. Same here. Bit of movement here, not much. Just what you would call stabilizing, pushing Ukrainians back to basically even out the front line, instead of having a front line that looks like that, they have a front line that looks like that. Okay, so there's some back movement here in this, and Russia has taken more territory, but in the Pavlovsk area, only a little bit of movement, not much to speak of. Russia's still fighting over this road. However, west of Pavlovsk, Russia has retaken Ukraine. There goes. Normally it's 48 hours. It's been a bit longer than 48 hours. Most Ukrainian attacks since 2022 have failed. 2022, a few in 23, I think one in 24, that's about it. Most don't last 48 hours before the Ukrainians are either kicked out or wiped out. But Russia's taken more territory as well here. So they control more of the road to Pavlovsk. So they'll be able to move up more men and machines. They'll bulldoze the road and keep clearing mines until they get more men and machines, usually artillery. But more likely it's going to be aimed up here to cut this road and supply line into Pavlovsk. Russia's made more headways here. Not much here. Still fighting down here. Still fighting here, but of course the Ukrainian, they've taken a lot more territory here. The Ukrainian offensive completely wiped out here. So this leaves, of the 5 in the last month, there's only one slightly left. Slightly, because... And of course Ukraine, like a child, has lashed out at Donetsk. And, of course, whining when Russia retaliates. So, 18 hours ago, they striked Donetsk. And, this is old. Which is new? I think Zaporozhia's new, or is that old? Yeah, 12 hours. So, 18 hours ago, Ukraine attacks. Then they complain that Russia's attacked them. 12 hours, 15 hours ago. Wait, didn't Ukraine attack first? How can Russia be the aggressor when Ukraine attacked first? Wow. I don't care which side you're on. You got to tell the truth, man. Truth will set you free. Because 490, I thought it was more than that. But overall, there's different munitions, ranging from mortars to drones to missiles. Now, one of the airstrikes on Ukraine, which I don't think was marked, but probably because... Wow! So Russia does... look. Let's see. Go to in the... Does... Well, we know Novoversky. There we go. In this area. Not a single mark. All right, let's see. Do they mention Novoversky? Nope. So, if you were only reading Al Jazeera, you would think Russia was only attacking villages. They didn't recapture Zakrin. Russia has not occupied Zakrin. They've only ever... It's changed hands so many times that they don't even mark it on the map anymore. But they would have you believe that Russian forces launched airstrikes only on settlements. And without context. Well, here's the context. 2 were on mercenary positions. Now, this is unusual. We're going to probably hear more about Dmitry soon. But former Ukrainian Dmitry Kuleba was in Ukraine. Zelensky put out a memo putting a travel restriction on all Ukrainian men, which will take place on September 3rd. This included former diplomats. I believe, and if you've ever read the Cold War files, this man is a member of the Ukrainian Intelligence Bureau. Many of the members of the Ukrainian Intelligence Bureau are currently members of the Ukrainian government. Okay? Dmitry Kuleba probably has fled to Poland, probably because Zelensky suspects that he has been leaking. Not to Russia. An even bigger sin. Leaking the truth about the Ukraine war to Westerners. Just remember, foreign diplomats do and have ties to intelligence organizations. They either work. It's an open secret. You go to Cold War Files. It's Cold War Files. It's a long list of, I think it was called the Cold War Files. It's a documentary about how Russian diplomats couriered orders from KGB through Poland. One of the Polish diplomats in the 1970s defected and brought with him and exposed 1,923 Soviet agents, some of whom who were working for a long time at the CIA and the State Department. You wonder why a lot of things were going wrong for America for a long time during the Cold War. That's because so many Americans were spilling their guts to the Russians. Now, I think his crime, if he's in Poland, probably talking to the Poles about the truth and might have spilt some truths that Zelensky didn't like being heard and decided to put a travel restriction on him. And he knows what happens in Ukraine. If they lock you in Kiev, it's a death sentence. Again, properly ended. Zelensky has been increasingly paranoid. Allegedly because Kuba's failed to secure more arms. It isn't Kubla's fault. It's your fault, Zelensky. You were given 3 years to halt the Russians, hold them, and then secure a peace deal. You were meant to secure peace. You were elected to secure peace in the Donbass. But you decided to side with the war profiteers. It's your fault, Zelensky. A lot of Ukrainians have pointed that out, and now they're paying the price. But ultimately, Zelensky will pay the price. If you don't see the parallels between the fall of the Nazis, Zelensky, the fall of the communists in Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, it's just playing out all over again. The badges may be different, the names and titles may be different, but the basic facts are the same. They get into conflicts into conflicts too big to handle. They betray their friends and allies. They fail to achieve any meaningful goals. Then they waste lives in meaningless stalling tactics. You imagine how if Russia, when Gorbachev came to power and realized that the Russian economy was going to collapse, and you imagine if instead of if he'd gone to the West, got a secured $30 billion bailout, and when he returned, he allowed Boris Yeltsin and others to form new political parties sooner. You imagine. The breakup of the Soviet Union was under better circumstances. How many lives would have been saved? If the 1993 treaties were put into effect instead of sitting unsigned on desks? And if the 1996, was it 96, Putin? Imagine then, if in Russia, in a much better position, having Gorbachev step down, losing the election to Yeltsin, then Russia joining the European Union, along with Eastern Europe, all separate countries. We would have had a smaller Russia. We wouldn't have had half the wars in the Middle East. We would have had so much progress if it wasn't for Bill Clinton and Blair Major and many others. Okay, it's not just the left; it's the right too. If so many people were not short term, but every politician only cares about the next election, except for Trump. Trump has always acted like a second-term president. Now, as we can see, deadly violence has broken out in Nepal. Obviously, Chinese influence. They're trying to create as many problems as they can, but the Nepalese are also suffering. India as well. India meddling in their affairs. Now, again, not marked on the map, the Russians have advanced into Tolstoy, a major battle resulting in the death of up to 220 Ukrainians, losses of around 440 in total. Ukraine. Yes, was it yesterday? No, a couple of days ago. Told you Ukraine had a new missile. Well, it's actually called the Flamingo. And as I said yesterday, it looks like the V1. Now, it's actually an oversized Penguin missile, British anti-ship missile, combined with a French rocket assist, which is used by one of the French bombers to take off, and it's got a booster, which a main gas engine, from pretty much straight out of the German V1. I was going to say Russian. Well, Russians were working with Germany on the V1 before Operation Barbarossa. So how Russia got its hands on rocket technology in the first place. And Germany, however, made a huge mistake by putting some of its, which Russia was able to capture some of the German plants. And before the German advance, were able to move them to the Far East. Ukraine's long-range aerial attack program is bearing fruit, according to Fabian Hoffman. But however, this started in mid-23, began acquiring long-range strike arsenal, though claiming to be a Ukrainian program, it's in fact entirely dependent on Western partners. There was the same time they started developing long-range drones with UK. Again, this is French, English. But, of course, what they wanted was field testing of the new French missile. So, and of course, the British wanted the testing of their new Penguin missile. So they combined the technologies, strapped on a gas turbine, and a French rocket assist pack. But in reality, it's a glide bomb. Okay, it's an anti-ship missile launch from high altitude. It's a glide bomb. That's strapped on. That's strapped on. It doesn't have a rocket motor or whatever. This is all testing new technologies. But in reality, it's an anti-ship missile launched from high altitude as a glide bomb. But Ukraine has always been after its own missile program. Drones are a new thing, of course, for surveillance. But because Ukraine has it in their head that they're going to be Captain Sky Shield of Europe. Now, without going into specific details, because they aren't always available public, various reporters have cited that the US has supplied Ukraine with counter-drone technology, including jammers, which Ukraine has allegedly adapted and effectively used in combat. Effective against various Russian tactics, including the Modi 2 backpack jammer, which has been able to block various drone frequencies, as well as US drone autopilots to enable Ukrainian drones to evade jamming, and other electronic warfare systems. However, we've recently heard that US has developed 7 different systems, not just the Modi 2. This is actually one of the older systems. And they have also been deployed. Now, apparently they said yesterday, I don't think I reported on it, the South Korean system was sent to Ukraine. Now, I think that's because one of the American systems was developed in conjunction with South Korea. But I think it's still an American system. But jam-resistant drones were ready back in 2024. Ukrainians have been training on American drones. Why, if they have their own drone program? Obviously, because they don't. Drone warfare is evolving. Vulnerabilities have been identified, particularly how Ukraine used its drones smuggled behind enemy lines. Recently, Chinese drones disguised as civilian drones have turned up. IJT, these are Chinese surveillance drones linked to satellites. They're being carried in by Chinese tourists, but what they do is they leave them behind on building. They leave them behind, and these drones activate and conduct surveillance. But yeah, drone jammers. Yeah, but they admit now that Ukraine war, obviously, is a battleground is a live fire test of weapons for the US and Russia. So Europe, of course, is accused of prolonging this war by providing financial support to Zelensky and encouraging him to continue the fight. But Macron is paying the political price back home. He is in a panic. Poland's in a panic. Hungary is very upset. They're going to do everything they can to... Hungary and Slovakia are going to do everything they can. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Europe is going to give them the middle finger because they think big Ukraine, bigger prize, you'll be brought to heel just like most of other Eastern European countries. But Latvia and Serbia, they've created the illegal breakaway republic of Kosovo by flooding them with Albanians. Sooner or later, more and more Europeans are going to wake up to the tactics of the European Union, divide and break up. And of course, as you see, if these all got together and helped Serbia in the first place, but they had their own problems. And that's the thing, isn't it? When they realised that, wait, all these problems we had could have gone away overnight if we all just shook hands and worked together against the EU instead of working for them. See, the EU didn't create... The EU is actually mimicking the Commonwealth that Eastern Europe used to have centuries ago. It was actually the breakup of that Commonwealth that helped create Ukraine. Because a lot of this land here was known as Ukraine, but it was just not a country. It was just the land we didn't control and nobody else did. There was Castle Kiev and a couple of roads through to Crimea and to Moscow, because the winter road through here was off, you had, this was, this all has changed politically so much. But so will Ukraine. Ukraine war is creating a hardening of the Ukrainian people by purpose, but this nationalism will bite back when they realise that Zelensky's a foreigner destroying their country on purpose so that he and his mates can flee overseas and live like kings. You see this with Spain, you've seen this with Italy. Eventually, the rich, they take their wealth and run. Onassis did this. Blodovich wasn't just Onassis, but when Onassis and others took their wealth out of Greece, the people who fled Italy after the war, taking a lot of their wealth to the United States, Europe is going to wake up and realise that, you have to balance, okay? This is the problem. People want to go to extreme left or extreme right, not realising that, the extreme right's anarchy and the extreme left is absolutism, You absolutely have to follow our rules, absolutely, no exceptions, except when we have to create exceptions. So, but everything has to be controlled by the government, even corporations. Fascism is just a step of socialism to absolute powerism, or communism, whatever you want to call it. It's absolute power, okay? This war will, or should, I should say, this war will end, but it should have ended already, okay? It should have ended in 22, there was an opportunity in 23 and 24, it's now an opportunity on the table, but everybody's saying Zelensky won't go to Moscow, so it's Zelensky's fault. Okay, he's stalling for time. Nobody else. So thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and please support the channel. You can support me on Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. Patreon, sorry. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and bye for now.